Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I mean, you wouldn't notice this, but I was kind of ill. I've been ill, and because of this, I'm maybe behind recording. So I'm going to have to catch up. And today we're starting book six, which is a very interesting book in a sense because some people argue that Peter Simpson and some other people have argued that this is kind of an appendix, a kind of an odd book. I argue this book six, is the promised, what he's promised, Aristotle promised in book four about the establishment of a regime, about the question about how do you, which regime is established, how, the promise of, or which regime suits which country and then how to establish it, right? And I think this is what this chapter is about. This is about establishing regimes. So book four was when we looked at the kind of the regime and its parts, understand its nature, its characters. Um, and book five was about uh, change and preservation change, right, of regimes, metabolic change of regimes and the regime change in that sense, and then or revolution, we can say, then preservation, right? Now, six is about how one's established regimes, and today we're looking at chapter one. Now, it's kind of a straightforward thing. It says how many varieties there are, and which they are, both the deliberative and authoritative elements of the regime, right, and the arrangements connected with the offices concerning courts, which sort are organized with a view to which sort of regime. Further, concerning the destruction and preservation of regimes, from what these things arise and through what causes, this was spoken of earlier. In other words, here he explains, he's basically gone through we've gone through book four, right? What was this is book four and five, which is what are the varieties of them, right? Then the varieties they are and which they are, in other words, scope of regimes. Then the questions of the deliberative and authoritative elements of the regimes, right? Uh, um, uh, of the regimes, and then the arrangements connected with the offices and concerning courts. So that's um, uh, the last three chapters of book four, right? Now, further concerning destruction, how regimes destroy and are preserved, and then what and from what things they arise, and through what causes. Again, book five, right? Everything up here. Now he says, but since it turned out that there are several kinds of democracies, well, right? But since it turned out there were several types of democracies, as well as of the other regimes in a similar fashion, it is not a bad thing to investigate anything that remains to be said about the former, and at the same time to identify the modes of organization that is proper and advantageous for each. So, okay, so there's something. It's not a bad thing to investigate. In other words, saying we have to investigate what about we know that there's several types of democracies, and as this was true about other regimes as well. And therefore, it's investigate. It's we'll investigate what remains to be said about this, right? And he continues. Further combinations of all the modes that have been spoken of must also be investigated, for when they are conjoined, they make regimes overlap, so that there are oligarchic aristocracies and regimes of a more democratic cast. Okay, this is polities, regimes of more democratic. It's the word again. Remember, we said politea is used in one sense, in the generic sense, but also is used as regime, and also used as a particular type in the original typology of book 3:7 and also 4:2, right? Chapter 4:2. Um, so therefore, he says, and because these interconjoin, in other words, we have to remember always that the nature of the regime and the political community is an aggregation of the different parts of the koinonia or the given community, so that there's going to be different, and then those parts of what, remember we talked about the parts, the multitude, the notables, the wealthy, the poor, um, those who give sustenance, the farmers, all the classes, right? So we have, in this sense, a an understanding that the different classes are merged. And remember, the regime is basically the part that the regime is the ordering of a given political community, and therefore um, the which part is ruling, which part exercises authority is the polituma, right? The ruling part, right? This is connected with the regime, that the regime shapes the polis, right? Or the political community. Um, Now there's different types, aristocracies and this, and they're gonna be mixed, right? He says they conjoin. In other words, different parts are conjoined. That they make, and the regimes overlap in that sense. Now we're getting a sense. It's only there's any discussion of so aristocracy and so-called aristocracy, right? Of these books, and the regime called regime, or Lord translated as polity, um, are really conjoined entities, right? And the real thing is the real type regime type at question is rule of the people or rule of the few, right? Many few. That's the hoi polloi, many hoi logoi. Um, and these are the pure types of regime in that sense, and everything else is kind of a conjoining of things. Um, and this is interesting in that sense. So that's other guy, so that so that he's not going to say that his aristocracy is rule of the best. The argument. Remember, the earlier understanding of aristocracy was rule of the best. Now, regimes of a more democratic cast. Okay, that's how it ends that sentence. Now, I mean that there are conjunctions that should be investigated, but at present but at present have not been. For example, if the deliberative element and what is connected with the selection of officials is organized as oligarchical, but matters connected with the courts aristocratically, or these and what is connected with deliberative elements oligarchically, and the what is connected with the selection of officials aristocratically, or if in some other manner not at all what is in some other manner not at all what is combined is proper to the regime. Now this is, let me look at note two. Themes appears. Lord, this is Lord's point. Two themes appear to be announced here: the varieties of democracy, right, and the modes and the institutional modes appropriate to them, and the possible conjunctions of such modes forming hybrid conjunctions of which of a variety of different regimes. A freezing up, freezing up. I hate freezing up. Come on, move. Sorry, we're having some computer problems. Um, Democracy and derivative oligarchy occupies 1 through 7, and chapter 8 deals with the varieties of functions of offices, which appears to be a preparatory to the discussion of the second theme, which is missing from book 6 in that sense, as we have it. So there's something missing here, that famous argument here. Let's go back. So this question of now I have a question. I'm going to suggest that it's not missing in that sense. It's present, but it's something we have to think out through. It's not explicitly Joel Lord says, and I think I agree with him to that degree. In other words, this question of what combinations, the combinations. Now, this is that all regimes are combinations. In all regimes, there's nothing like all regimes are basically composite wholes of the different parts, and each part has a tendency either the or tendency towards being pushing it towards democratically or populistically. That was it, and things that are to the many or the majority is seen as kind of um, um, popular or democratic. Um, Things that go to few, the few, the olor, um, the few, that is going to be these other regimes, aristocracy and oligarchy. And to the one, it's monarchy, right? We discussed in chapter 5. So now let's look at the fifth, so-called fifth paragraph, fifth sentence, a section here, right here. What sort of democracy is suitable for what sort of city? And in the same way, too, what sort of oligarchy is suitable for what sort of multitude? And of the remaining regimes, which is advantage for which people was spoken of earlier. Now, this is, again, this is chapter 12, uh, 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 book 4, chapter 12, right? That's the, and I think this is a very odd chapter. That book 412 is, we went through it before, and I've always argued book 12. It's kind of like the questions of regimes, about the nature of regimes. This is often the point. Oh, that's the polity argument, 11, 12, and 13. No, it's more complicated in that sense. It's basically the argument of, okay, trying to figure out how to make how to sort things that regimes work out well. Okay, so let's continue here. So we've spoken of this question earlier. Um, which sort of multitude is advantage this? Which sort of peoples? In other words, um, uh, uh, these questions of what kind of regime and what kind of type of regime is suitable towards a given people, a given multitude, a given and which is advantageous and regimes are advantageous for certain peoples. We did that. Okay, that's book 4. Yeah? Yet, since it should be made clear not only which of these sorts of regimes is best for the cities, but also how one should institute both these and others. In other words, so the question of instituting regimes. Let us address this in a succinct fashion. So let us first speak of democracy, for how one should do this will become evident. Also, for the regime that corresponds to it, the one some call oligarchy. So what's now? Now he says basically, how do we institute a regime? How do we found it? It's a very important question in this sense. Here is taking in many sense, book 6 is almost, if book 1 is kind of like a kind of biology, well, it was a zoology, biology of regime, right? We take the regime and we dissect it and we try to understand its parts and its workings. Uh, and book 5 is about preservation of change, the physics, movement, right? Movement and life and death, movement, right? It's about movement and change. Um, and the question of preservation as well, preservation of change, and how things grow and how things die, right? Then destroy. Motion, right? Physics. So if one is, in a sense, the regime at rest, where we dissect it. Book 5 is the regime in motion. Book 6 is how do we create it, and therefore it kind of has to. You have to take these two things. You can't talk about the establishment until we've understood the parts, the things we've gone through here. With a view to this inquiry, it is necessary to grasp all the things that are characteristic of a popular rule or that are held to accompany democracies. For it is a result of bringing together of these that several kinds of democracy arise, and that there are several sorts of democracy that differ, and not a single sort. Now, in other words, this is going to remind us. Remember the different forms of democracy of Book 4, Chapter 4, in book 4, chapter 6, right? Where he explained that in different types of and in that account of the nature of what they are. Now he's going to explain how they arise, why they arise, and why there's not and that there are several sorts of democracy that differ, and not a single sort. Now there are two reasons there are several sorts of democracies. First, there is one spoken of earlier, that their people are different, right? This is again of chapter 4, those passages. Um, for one multitude is of the farming sort, and another of the working sort and the laboring sort. Um, uh, uh, um, uh, uh, the working and laboring sort, so the physical laborers, right? Another of the the so there was we talked about the different types of multitude. One multitude is farming, and another sort is the working and laboring sort, right? And if the first of these is added to the second, or again the third to both, these create a difference not only with respect to democracy being better or worse, but even with respect to it being the same sort of democracy. So in other words, um, the working, I think this is I, I, I think he's mixed something here. The farming, the work. Okay, the one is the manual laborers, the benosoi, which are the bodies, and then there's the craftsmen, right? The trade. So I think we have to be careful here. I think the laboring is the benosoi, and the working may be the craftsman. But it said there's one multitude, the multitude of the farming sort, the working sort, and the laboring sort, right? If the first of these is added to the second, farming to the working, or again to the third, to both. He says these create not only a difference, not only with respect to democracy being better or worse, whether a regime is going to be better or worse. Again, that led us to the question in chapter 11, right, of book 4, the problem of the dangers of the poor, the vice, in other words, the disadvantages of the rich and the disadvantages of the poor. This and the mean and why the middle or the middling sort, the ones who have enough, is like this. He says those who have too much wealth and too little wealth, or no means. Right. These are something he talked about in book 4, chapter 11, and I think this is what he's trying to talk about here. So therefore, that's one problem. Right. One problem is that there's different the multitudes, the multitudes are going to be different. The second reason is the one we are speaking of now. So okay, this is the new one. For the things that accompany democracies and are held to belong to this sort of regime makes democratic democracies different when they are brought together differently. So in other words, how they're brought together, the way they're brought together. In other words, they're belongs to this sort of democracy makes democracy different when they are brought together differently. One sort will be accompanied by fewer, another by more, and another by all of them. Okay, so therefore the question of this class of people, like who is the ruling element in that thing. It is useful to be familiar with each of these things, both with a view of instituting whichever sort of democracy one happens to want, with a view to the reforming existing ones. Okay, so therefore two questions: how do you bring a democracy you want, and how to reform existing democracies? Again, this is the understanding of the parts and the workings of them, right? And the varieties of those. Those who establish regimes seek to combine everything that derives from the basic premise of the regime. In other words, so therefore, those who, okay, but they err so in doing so, as was discussed earlier in the discourses on the destruction and preservation of regimes. And that's, I think that is, chapter 9, right? You talked about that destruction, why things are things. And again, this is about the question of you don't, in other words, some things, in other words, there's a danger when people make regimes. They think, okay, Our democracy, therefore, I should have maximum. I should have take take democracy to its logical extreme, or oligarchy to its, if the more participation, the better, right? The more the wider the franchise, the better. No, that's an error. That's, in other words, taking democracy or oligarchy to its extreme leads to its most effective and most you take democracy or oligarchy to its extreme principle. What ends up happening is that the final this is the last democracy and last oligarchy, which are tyrannical. They become tyrannical. They become unstable. So this is the problem here, that you need to have to understand that okay, we're going to talk about this now. So now he finishes this chapter with, let us now speak of the claim and character of different types of democracies and what they strive for. So let's look at the claim and the character of different types of democracies and what they stand for. And that's how we end the first chapter. Okay. Well, if you have any comments or questions or issues you want to talk about regarding this chapter, please put them in the comments below. If you liked it, like it, please like it. That's important. Likes help, get people attention to this. I don't know why that's ad block, but I had something annoying happen. We had ad block, ad block. Um, if you've disliked it, say no, and say why. If you've not subscribed and like to subscribe to get further things, help grow the channel some, please subscribe. Please get others to subscribe. If you like this video, share it on social media, please, so get more attention, so this channel's grow. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow the links below. There's links to my social media. There's also, if you want to help the channel financially, or help me do this growing a little bit, subsidize my research and doing these things, you can do so. Patreon, subscribe. I don't have anyone, so let's go. Another way you can do it is you can go buy my book, Aristotle's a notebook for Aristotle's politics. This is a kind of a Cliff's Notes. I've talked. If you see my other videos, you heard me talk about this. Because I always pimp my book, right? It's about it's basically Cliff Notes on Aristotle's politics. It's a study guide. It's a useful guide to go through the politics. It's not a commentary. It's not interpretation. It is basically full of charts and notes, various books and chapters of the politics to help you get a better handle of it. And okay, if you go buy it through Lulu, if you buy directly from Lulu, I get the profit that Amazon would get, okay, or of any published seller. It's available on Amazon and those places. You might want to go buy it from there because they cheap. They'll sell it for the sending cost, the traveling cost will be free from Amazon. Maybe not. So that's it. I'll stop here. Have a good day. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.